The silent priority alert came through at 2:47 in the afternoon. I was seated inside a secure briefing room in Washington, D.C., roughly 300 meters from where my phone rested on the table. In front of me, wall-mounted screens streamed satellite thermal imagery of a laundering pipeline operating out of Bogota. The room was quiet, all murmurs and muted analysts. My phone made no sound, no buzz, no ring. It simply lit up with a single crimson notice. Perimeter breach, Sector 4, home office. I didn't flinch. No spike of adrenaline, no sharp intake of breath. I calmly pushed my chair back, excused myself from the table, and stepped into the hallway. Once alone, I opened the secure live feed. The video was flawless, military resolution, every pixel razor sharp. Standing in the center of my Manhattan penthouse living room was not a masked intruder or a professional thief. It was my sister, Chloe. She wore a pristine white designer dress, the kind meant to be admired under chandeliers, not surveillance cameras. In her hand was a thermal cutting tool I recognized instantly, industrial grade, black market, the kind designed to liquefy biometric locks without tripping thermal alarms. She didn't hesitate or look around. She moved straight to my office wall and slid aside the false panel concealing the safe. Her motions were practiced, confident. She placed the tool against the locking mechanism, waited exactly 4 seconds as the magnesium coil burned through hardened steel pins, then pulled the door open. Inside was only one item. She reached in and removed a weighty brushed metal drive, compact and rectangular, roughly the size of a deck of cards. To anyone else, it would have looked like a luxury crypto wallet. She lifted it toward the camera, smiled, a smile sharp and empty, and mouthed 2 words, "Found it." Then she turned and walked out. She had no idea she'd just activated a silent federal warrant. No idea that what she held wasn't a wallet at all. It was a ledger, and she had just exited a Faraday cage carrying live evidence tied to an active federal RICO investigation. I tapped my screen once. Protocol 0 engaged. Then I returned to the briefing room, retrieved my jacket, and left. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from right now. I'd love to know who is part of our community of silent warriors. I didn't call Chloe. I didn't warn my parents. I headed straight to the garage, climbed into my government-issued black SUV, and began the drive north toward the Hamptons. Chloe's engagement party was scheduled to begin in 3 hours. Navigation estimated I'd arrive just as champagne was being poured. As I merged onto the highway, I initiated a silent tracking tag on the drive. A red dot appeared on my dashboard display, gliding steadily east along the Long Island Expressway. She was transporting the evidence directly to the party. Driving has always been where my mind works best. The steady vibration of tires on pavement, the sealed, sterile quiet of the vehicle, it focuses me. To my family, I was Grace, the dull IT consultant. The one who fixed routers, optimized spreadsheets, and traveled for client audits. They didn't know about the badge tucked inside my glove compartment. They didn't know those consulting trips were actually extractions, covert audits, or forensic deep dives into cartel-backed financial networks. They saw what suited them. A quiet woman in practical shoes, lacking Chloe's magnetism, lacking her shine, but silence is not weakness, it's conditioning. I learned that early. When you grow up as the overlooked child, the one eclipsed by the golden sibling, you learn how to disappear. You learn to observe. You learn that when people think you're insignificant, they stop masking who they are. I spent 18 years mastering invisibility in my own house, learning how to walk without stirring floorboards. How to listen through walls, how to read micro-expressions that betrayed lies before words ever formed. The Secret Service didn't teach me those skills, they refined them. They showed me how to turn invisibility into a weapon, how to be the person no one remembers so you can remember everything. My family mistook my quiet for compliance. They never realized it was surveillance. I checked the tracker again. The dot was no longer moving. East Hampton, my parents' summer estate, tonight's venue. I could see it clearly in my mind, white tents stretched across manicured lawns, an open bar pouring vintage champagne. My mother, Angela, fluttering through it all in soft pastels, correcting napkins and seating cards. My father, Richard, holding court with a tumbler of scotch, pontificating loudly about markets he barely understood. And Chloe, radiant, central, adored, likely telling guests how she'd heroically saved the venue by securing the missing funds. They had no idea what was driving up that driveway. I called my deputy director. I didn't ask permission. I didn't request assistance. I delivered a report. Asset compromised, location confirmed, requesting tactical intercept. Authorization code Delta 9. His response was measured. Com, tactical unit deploying from New York field office. ETA 40 minutes. Do not engage until perimeter is locked. I ended the call. I wasn't heading to a celebration anymore. I was en route to a crime scene, and for the first time in my life, I wouldn't be the ghost, I would be the haunting. I arrived at the gates 45 minutes later. The sun was dipping low, throwing long shadows across the lawns. Somewhere nearby, a string quartet played something elegant and costly. The valet stared at my SUV, confused. It wasn't a sleek luxury sedan or sports car. It was dusty, armored-looking, out of place. I ignored him, parked on the grass, and stepped out. I straightened my blazer, checked that the concealed holster at my hip wasn't printing, and walked toward the tent. The air carried notes of expensive perfume, sea salt, and the sickly sweet rot of entitlement. My mother saw me first. She didn't smile. Her gaze swept over my black trousers, black blazer, white shirt, then tightened. She approached not to welcome me, but to block me. "You're late," she hissed softly. "And honestly, Grace, look at you. You're dressed for a funeral. This is your sister's engagement party. Couldn't you try to look festive for once?" I studied her carefully, really studied her, the tightness around her eyes. The nervous flutter of her hands. She knew Chloe had taken the drive. She just didn't care. "I'm here now, Mother," I said evenly. "Where is Chloe? She's busy being the bride-to-be," she snapped. "Don't distract her. And smile, people are watching." She pressed a champagne flute into my hand and instantly pivoted back into charm, laughing with a nearby group. I took a sip. It was warm. I set it on a passing tray and scanned the tent. There she was. Chloe stood beside the head table, laughing at something her fiancé Tyler had said. She looked luminous, triumphant. And sitting right next to her, clutch plainly visible, was the drive. Not concealed, not protected, displayed like a trophy. Anger hardened in my chest. Not because she'd stolen from me, but because she was so certain she was untouchable. I started toward her. My father intercepted me, slapping a heavy hand onto my shoulder. His breath reeked of scotch. "Grace, you made it." Relief, not warmth. "Listen, your mother says you're upset about the borrowing. We'll talk later. Don't cause a scene. It's family money anyway. Borrowing, not theft, not breaking and entering. Borrowing." I looked at his flushed face and finally understood the real horror. They didn't see me as separate. To them, I was a resource. My home, my assets, my boundaries, all communal, available whenever the golden child required something. Psychologists call it enmeshment. A narcissistic dynamic where individuality is erased to serve the favored few. They hadn't stolen from me. They'd simply reallocated assets from storage unit Grace to showroom Chloe. I was a utility. A faucet, and the most terrifying part, they truly believed they were right. I gently removed my father's hand. I said nothing. I kept walking. The music faded as I reached the head table. Chloe tapped her spoon against her glass. Silence spread. She smiled broadly. "Thank you all for coming," she chimed. There were some rumors about deposit issues, but thanks to a generous and unexpected contribution from my wonderful sister Grace, we were able to secure this dream venue. Applause erupted. Faces turned toward me, approving, admiring. Chloe blew me a kiss. My mother mouthed, "See, it's fine." I stood there, wrapped in applause built on lies. I looked at the drive on the table. I looked at the satellite feed on my phone, which showed 6 tactical units moving into position around the perimeter of the garden. The red dots were closing in. I didn't smile back. I didn't wave. I walked up to the table, reached past the flowers, and picked up the drive. The room went dead silent. K.H. Lowe's smile faltered. "What are you doing, Grace?" she hissed through her teeth. "Put that back." I turned to face the crowd. I held up the drive. It caught the light, heavy and cold and metallic. "This isn't a contribution," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried to the back of the tent. I didn't engage my diaphragm. I engaged my command voice, the voice I used when I was briefing the Joint Chiefs. The voice that didn't ask for attention but demanded compliance. "This is federal evidence," I said. "And you have exactly 10 seconds to explain why you removed it from a secured facility before the people outside come in here and ask you themselves." Chloe laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "Oh my God, Grace, you're so dramatic. It's just a Bitcoin wallet. Mom said it was just old crypto stuff you weren't using. Stop trying to ruin my night." I placed my phone on the table next to the cake. I tapped the screen to mirror the display onto the large monitors that had been set up for the slideshow. Suddenly, the photos of Chloe and Tyler as children disappeared. They were replaced by a live thermal feed of the estate we were sitting in. The guests gasped. You could see the heat signatures of the guests in the tent, warm clusters of red and orange. But around the edges, moving through the hedges, moving toward the tent flaps were cold blue shapes. Uniform shapes moving with precision. That's not a Bitcoin wallet, Chloe. I said that drive contains the decryption keys for the Sinaloa cartel's North American laundering network. It was seized in a raid 3 days ago. It is currently the single most tracked object on the eastern seaboard. The color drained from her face. My parents stood up, knocking over their chairs. Richard was shouting now. Grace, turn that off. What the hell is wrong with you? You're scaring people. I ignored him. I looked straight at my sister. By taking this drive out of a Faraday cage and bringing it here, you didn't just steal from me. You broadcasted a homing signal to the U.S. government and potentially to the cartel associates who are currently looking for this hardware. You haven't just committed grand larceny, Chloe. You've committed terrorism financing and obstruction of a federal investigation. The air left the room. It was a vacuum. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The reality of what I was saying slammed into them. This wasn't a family squabble. This wasn't drama. This was real, but we just wanted the money. Chloe whispered. Her voice was trembling. Mom said you wouldn't mind. I looked at my mother. She was clutching her pearls, staring at me with pure hatred. You did this, she spat. You brought this danger into our house. You set her up. I shook my head. No, Mother, I didn't set her up. I just stopped protecting her from reality. And reality has a way of crashing the party. I tapped my earpiece. A gesture none of them had ever seen me do. Protocol 0 is active. Suspect is in custody of the asset. Proceed. The lights in the tent cut out. For a second, there was total darkness. Then the sound of flashbangs detonating in the garden. Boom, boom, boom. White light flooded the tent, blinding and disorienting. Guests screamed and dropped to the floor. The canvas walls of the tent were sliced open. Tactical teams in full body armor poured in laser sights cutting through the smoke. Federal agents, get down, get down. It was chaos. Expensive crystals shattered. Tables were overturned. People were scrambling, crawling under tablecloth, sobbing. I stood still. My hands were visible, held away from my body. I was the only person in the room who wasn't panicking. I watched my father, the man who had ruled our family, with an iron fist of disapproval cower under the buffet table, covering his head with a linen napkin. Agents swarmed the head table. Chloe tried to run. It was a pathetic attempt. She scrambled backward, tripping over her train, and tried to shove the drive into a floral arrangement. A tactical officer tackled her. The image was visceral. The influencer in her $5,000 engagement dress face pressed into the grass, zip ties being cinched around her wrists. Get off her, my mother screamed, trying to pull the officer away. That's my daughter. You can't do this. Do you know who we are? Another agent grabbed my mother and forced her back. Ma'am, step back or you will be detained. The lead agent walked into the center of the tent. Agent Miller, I knew him well. We had worked the Bogota case together. He saw me standing there. He didn't smile. He walked over his rifle, lowered but ready. Agent, he said, nodding to me. Situation report. I pointed at K.H. Lowe, who is now being hauled to her feet. Grass stains on her white dress, mascara running down her face. Suspect in possession of stolen federal evidence, I said. My voice was devoid of emotion. No anger, no pity, just the facts. The chain of custody has been broken. The asset needs to be secured immediately. Chloe looked at me. Her eyes were wide, terrified, pleading, Grace, please tell them. Tell them it was a mistake. Tell them I'm your sister. I looked at her. I looked at my parents, who were watching me with a mixture of horror and expectation, waiting for me to fix it. Waiting for me to be the invisible fix-it girl one last time. I looked back at Agent Miller. I don't have a sister, I said. Process her. They dragged her away. The screaming didn't stop until they closed the doors of the armored van. The aftermath was a slow-motion car crash. The engagement was called off the next morning. Tyler released a statement distancing himself from the criminal activities of his former fiancée. The influencer brand K.H. Lowe had spent 5 years building became toxic overnight. Sponsorships were pulled. Her accounts were flooded with comments not of admiration, but of Shad and Freud. My parents were indicted for conspiracy. The text messages on K.H. Lowe's phone were damning. They hadn't just known about the theft, they had encouraged it. They had texted her the layout of my apartment. They had told her to take whatever you find. Grace won't do anything. They were facing 5 to 10 years. The estate in the Hamptons was seized by the state for asset forfeit investigations. I didn't visit them. I didn't go to the arraignment. I was promoted 3 weeks later. My clearance was raised to the highest level for recovering the asset and dismantling the domestic arm of the laundering network. I went back to the empty family home one last time before the state put the locks on. It was silent. The furniture was gone. The memories were just moes dancing in the light. I stood in the living room where I had spent so many years trying to be good, trying to be quiet, trying to be worthy of love that was never going to come. I left my key on the counter. I drove back to the city. That night, sitting in my penthouse, I received a letter. It was from the Federal Detention Center, K.H. Lowe's handwriting. I didn't open it. I walked to the fireplace, struck a match, and watched the envelope curl into black ash. I realized then that I hadn't just survived, I had evolved. I was no longer the boring sister. I was the one who was left standing. You cannot save someone who is addicted to their own destruction. That's the final lesson. If I had tried to save her, if I had covered for her one more time, I would have become an accessory to her crimes. I would have lost my career, my freedom, and my self-respect. I would have burned down my own life to keep her warm for another 10 minutes. Sometimes love isn't about holding on. It's about letting go of the rope before you get pulled over the cliff. Have you ever had to let someone hit rock bottom because you knew saving them would destroy you? Tell me your story in the comments below. And if you want to see more stories of justice served cold, make sure to follow.